As you know, the National Lawyers Guild has actually had a role in the foundation of the National Coalition to Protect Political Freedom. I was a member of the board with Dr. Erlinder when this began. We met because I wrote a series of articles after the, not the Bush administration, but the Clinton administration passed the original material support laws after the Oklahoma City bombing, when an American bombed the Oklahoma City courthouse, and the Clinton administration responded by passing a law that outlawed foreign terrorist organizations, and then made it a crime for Americans to support foreign terrorist organizations, like those in Buffalo. Right? But I wrote a series of articles at that time pointing out that terrorism would be the new communism. And of course, unfortunately, that has proven true. And we've heard a lot of discussion today about the Muslim people being targeted, which of course has been true. But in order to put this in its political context and to understand the nature of the struggle that we have, I want you to remember that in 1917, the Espionage Act was passed, in which people were identified as being opponents to World War I, because if they opposed the draft at that time or made statements against the war, they would be locked up and sent to prison. Eugene V. Debs, the head of the Socialist Party and the presidential candidate, was sent to federal prison. He got 1 million votes while he was in federal prison. He was eventually pardoned. There was a revolution in Russia. The Soviet Union was established in 1917. The Sedition Acts were passed. The Palmer raids occurred in 1920. People who were identified as foreign supporters of socialist countries were wrapped up and arrested wholesale and deported. And from 1920 until the early 1990s, if you were identified as being affiliated with a communist organization anywhere in the world, you could not enter the United States. For more than 70 years, the Supreme Court cases that are being used now, that the material support law was written to get around, they said, of course, that it was illegal to be a member of a communist party. So the Clinton administration wrote a law saying it's illegal to provide material support. It's not that it's illegal to be a member. Oh, you can be a member because the Supreme Court said you could be a member of a communist party. You just can't do anything if you're a member or if you're a supporter. You can't provide any support that's material. That's what's the crime. In order to get around the laws that were declared unconstitutional in the 1950s. Although you still couldn't come into the country if you were a communist because controlling the borders was different. So by passing these material support laws, they got around the First Amendment. But then 6 weeks ago, the Supreme Court said, in response to Elena Kagan, asking the question, well, Ms. Kagan, under these material support laws, does that mean that if someone goes to talk to an attorney and the attorney says, here is my advice, and the attorney speaks to someone about what they should do in doing something illegal, like going to the United Nations, is that speech material support? And Elena Kagan says, oh yes, it is. Now material support has become speech. And then the Supreme Court said in their opinion, well, we don't know exactly where the line is between material support and speech. So we'll decide on a case-by-case basis, which means that the FBI can go out and arrest people or have grand jury investigations in situations where they think it might have crossed the line between speech and material something, like passing out a leaflet. It's material. Just like the two Somali ladies that I've been advising back in Minnesota for the last year and a half, who collect old clothes and send them to a refugee camp in Kenya, who said, what should we do? We're collecting old clothes. It's our zakat. We're sending them to the place in Kenya where there's people who need it. I said, well, ladies, you know, if you send them to the refugee camp, the government's going to come and say, Al-Shabaab has supporters in the refugee camp. And so Al-Shabaab is going to get the Mickey Mouse t-shirts. So it's material support for terrorism. Everybody knows Al-Shabaab wears Mickey Mouse t-shirts. And 1 month after the Supreme Court changed the law, 12 more Somalis were indicted in Minnesota, including the two ladies who sent Mickey Mouse t-shirts to Somalia, to Kenya. And then, thank God, it finally happened. Some non-Somali anti-war activists got subpoenas in Minnesota a couple weeks ago. Finally, it's gotten out of the Muslim ghetto. Finally, we have a situation where the rest of the world, the rest of the community, knows that Pastor Niemöller in Germany was right. Remember? He said, first they came for the communists, and I wasn't a communist, so I didn't speak up. He said, then they came for the Catholics, and I wasn't a Catholic, so I didn't say anything. And then they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't raise a voice. And then they came for me, and there was no one left.